Okay, so when it comes to starting out with filmmaking, like it or not, you're gonna make a bunch of mistakes, but that's gonna be one of the best ways to learn new things and kind of get better over time. And obviously, when you're just a complete beginner, you're gonna make a lot more of those mistakes, but as you get more experience, they're gonna start happening less and less. In this video though, I wanna talk about a mistake that I've seen more times than I can count being made by complete beginners with just a few months of experience, as well as seasoned professionals who have been shooting for years. It's one of those things that people kind of pick up early on and it just sticks with them long term. And it's something that not a lot of people really consider when filming, but it can definitely end up making your footage look worse, and I can almost guarantee that after watching this video you're gonna start picking up on it a lot more often. So I'm gonna play a very quick sequence to kind of show you what I'm talking about, and I'm interested to see how many of you are gonna pick up on it initially. And while we're talking about this mistake, I actually want to mention another one that kind of stacks on top of this one, and chances are if someone is making one of these mistakes, they're probably making the other one as well. So after watching those clips, you might be feeling a little bit disoriented, which is completely normal. The mistake that I'm going to be talking about is not paying attention to the direction of movement as well as subject orientation whenever you're filming a scene. So you might have heard of the 180-degree shutter rule, which has to do with shutter speed and motion blur, but there's one more 180-degree rule that applies to cinematography. The very basic breakdown of this is that whenever you're filming anything, you want to imagine your space that you're working in from the top, and you want to imagine a straight line going through your space. Then you want to position your subject or your subjects on that line, and once you start filming, you want to try to keep your camera only on one side of that imaginary line, and as a result only on one side of your subjects. That way, if you're filming something like a conversation or a subject going somewhere, for example, you're making it a lot easier for the viewer to keep track of which direction each of the subjects is facing relative to the space that you're filming in, as well as to each other. This is important because now you can cut between wide, medium, and tight shots, and as long as you keep this rule in mind, things are going to look a lot more organized. In the sequence I showed you, I broke that rule in a very obvious way because I wanted to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, and as a result, the whole thing just looked a lot more confusing and just jarring. But if the camera was positioned correctly relative to that imaginary line that I just mentioned, the whole thing would just look a lot better because you wouldn't be left wondering why I'm facing left in one shot and then right in the other. With all of that said, there are a few ways that you can break this rule in a way that still makes sense to the viewer and actually serves the story that you're trying to tell. The first one would be just including a shot where you can clearly see your subject changing their orientation within the space. That way you're kind of letting the viewer know that they can expect to see the subject moving in a different direction in the next shot, instead of just cutting from one shot where the subject is facing the left side of the frame to then facing the right side for whatever reason. Something else you can do is including a shot that's positioned on the line itself. So that could mean in front of your subject or behind them, and you can just have it be like a normal locked off shot, or if you want to have a little bit of movement, it could be like a slow push in or pulling away from the subject. That's also a good way to give your viewer a heads up that you're no longer going to stay on the same side of the line as you were up until now, and you're kind of letting them prepare that you might be going to the other side of it for the next shot. One more option is to include the change in orientation as part of a tracking shot. For example, if your subject is walking somewhere and they have to change direction, you can just follow what they're doing with your camera movement. That's just a little bit more of a dynamic way to get the same thing done. So the reason I said I wanted to mention another problem that kind of stacks on top of this one is because all of this applies not just to the camera positioning relative to the subject, but to the camera movement itself as well. You might have seen people throwing together cinematic B-roll sequences where one shot is moving to the left and then the other shot is moving to the right, and then that just keeps repeating over and over again. And doing it this way can just end up getting really disorienting and annoying very quickly. Luckily, the way to fix this is pretty easy, and you just want to try to keep your camera movement consistent across clips. And if you want to change direction, you can add in like a static shot of your subject or a shot where it's moving forwards or backwards, and that way you're kind of breaking up the pattern of camera movement, and you're also giving the viewer time to subconsciously adjust and get ready for a change in the direction of the movement of the clips. It's kind of like what I talked about with that previous mistake, where you want to include a shot that's positioned right on that imaginary line that we talked about. As one last option to fix both of these, you could just try mirroring the clip in your editing software, but you have to be really careful with this one, because if there's text or something that makes it really obvious that your footage is flipped, it's going to have the opposite effect, and it's going to make the footage look a lot worse instead of helping. In general, it isn't the end of the world if you make this mistake, and a lot of people might not even notice it if you only do it occasionally. In some cases, you might even be forced to do it for whatever reason, but the point is, if you have control over the situation, it's something to be mindful of, because if you do it way too much, people are going to start picking up on it. I think it's also important to mention that if you're intentionally going for like a really chaotic and disorienting feeling with your footage, you could use this mistake as like a tool to your advantage. For example, it could be a great way to hint that your subject is like lost or confused in the context of their situation. So with all of that out of the way, keep in mind that with most rules in filmmaking, they're not set in stone, meaning that you are completely free to try and find creative ways to break them in a way that lets you create something completely unexpected that actually works. The reason I wanted to put together this video is because most of the time when I've seen people make this mistake, it's just that, it's just a mistake. I've rarely ever seen anybody doing it intentionally, and I definitely feel like you can tell the difference when they are versus when they're just not paying attention. So after watching this video, maybe you realize that you're one of the people making this mistake, and I hope I was able to give you a few ideas on how to fix it the next time you go and work on a project. If that's the case, you might want to check out this other video that I made a while back about other mistakes that people might be making because of bad advice they've heard. As always, thank you so much for watching this video until the end, and I'll see you in the next one.